yet they cut deeper than anything physical ever could. What happens when you give everything to those you love, and in return, they turn their backs on you? In this story, Helen, a mother and grandmother, tries to reconnect with her family, only to be crushed by the very people she thought would cherish her. But what if the greatest strength comes from standing up in silence, and the quietest acts of revenge are the most powerful? Let me take you through this journey. Subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. The story starts now. I've always believed that family was supposed to be everything. Growing up, my own family wasn't perfect, but I had my parents, my siblings, and a bond that felt unbreakable. When I married Tom, we promised we'd create something even stronger, something that would last for generations. But when Tom passed away last year, I felt like the foundation of my life crumbled right beneath my feet. I was left alone, no husband, no sense of direction. And so I began to search for something, anything, that would bring a spark back into my life. I thought that maybe, just maybe, I could rekindle something with my daughter, Amanda. She was my only child, and after all, she had her own family now, her husband, Ben, and their 2 kids. I wanted to feel like I was still needed, still relevant in their lives. So when Amanda and Ben bought a new house, I didn't think twice. I paid off their mortgage, the entire thing, all at once. It was my gift to them, a way to show I cared, a way to show I was still part of their world. It wasn't just money. It was a symbol that I was still there, still a mother, still a part of their family. But what did I get in return? Ben, the son-in-law I'd always thought of as kind, as someone who'd never hurt me, looked at me one afternoon and said, "You smell like a hospital. Please, don't sit on our new couch." I froze. The words sliced through me, cold and sharp. It was a small thing, sure, but in that moment, it hit me harder than I could have ever imagined. That sofa was new, yes, but it wasn't the sofa I was focused on. It was the way he looked at me, the way he spoke to me, as if I didn't matter, as if I was some inconvenience. I wanted to scream, I wanted to cry, but instead, I forced a smile and left the room. That's what a mother does, right? She sacrifices. She puts her own feelings aside for the good of her children. At least, that's what I always told myself. As I walked out of their living room, I couldn't shake the feeling that something inside me had snapped. I had given them everything. I had given them my love, my money, my time. And this was how they repaid me? With disdain? With coldness? It was more than I could bear, but what could I do? I was just their mother. I was just the person who had helped them, who had tried to build a bridge between us. That night, I stayed in my own home, alone. I cried, not for what had happened that day, but for the years I had spent giving everything of myself to my family, and yet feeling like I had nothing left to show for it. The next few weeks were even worse. Ben didn't change, didn't apologize. Amanda didn't even acknowledge it. But every time I went to their house, I could feel the distance growing between us. It wasn't just the physical space, the couch that I wasn't supposed to sit on. It was the emotional distance. I was an outsider in my own family, and worse, I was invisible. I wanted to fix it. I wanted to find a way back into their hearts. But with every passing day, it felt like the door was closing more tightly, and with every cold interaction, I could feel my heart slowly breaking. But one thing was becoming crystal clear. I was no longer willing to accept this. I had been giving, sacrificing, and loving for years, only to be met with cruelty and disregard. And the worst part? No one cared. No one noticed how much it hurt. Not Amanda, not Ben, not anyone. And then, it hit me like a bolt of lightning. If I wanted to be seen, if I wanted to be respected, I couldn't keep being the person who just gave and gave. I needed to change. And I would change, but the question was, how? I stood in my living room, staring out the window at the empty street outside. The cold wind whipped through the trees, sending shivers down my spine. But something inside me had shifted. I wasn't going to take this anymore. I didn't know how yet, but I would make them see me. I would make them respect me. I wasn't just Helen anymore. I was someone different now, and I'd start showing them. The days that followed were a blur of silent torment. I went about my life, but it was as if everything had changed overnight. I had tried, for so many years, to be the good mother, the supportive mother-in-law, the grandmother who was always present, always available. I had sacrificed so much, never asking for anything in return, believing that the love and appreciation I gave would one day come back to me, like a warm, comforting embrace. But that day, when Ben spoke those cruel words, it shattered me. It wasn't just the insult. It was the realization that despite everything I had done for them, despite the years I'd spent building a life of support and love, I was just an inconvenience, a burden, nothing more. And Amanda, my own daughter, she never once stepped in to defend me. Not when Ben said I smelled like a hospital, not when he asked me to leave their living room. It was as if she was blind to the hurt he was causing. I had always thought that she was my ally, my greatest support. I thought she would understand how much that comment had cut into me. But she didn't. She said nothing. She pretended like it wasn't happening. The days turned into weeks, and I found myself avoiding visits to their house. It was the only way to protect myself from the pain, but avoiding them only deepened the ache in my chest. I missed my grandchildren. I missed the times when our family had been whole, when laughter filled the air and our lives felt connected. Now, there was only silence. No one called, no one checked in. It felt like they were all just going on with their lives while I was left to fade into the background. I was a ghost in my own family. I spent more time alone in my own house where I could cry in peace. I didn't want to burden anyone with my pain, so I held it all inside. But with every passing day, the weight of it grew heavier. I felt as though I was suffocating, drowning in my own thoughts, unable to find a way out. I wondered where I went wrong, what I could have done differently to be seen, to be loved. But the answer was always the same. I had given everything, and yet it had never been enough. One evening, I sat in the living room, looking out at the darkened street. The silence in my home was suffocating. The emptiness echoed through the walls. My thoughts began to spiral, and I found myself wondering, what if I stopped giving? What if I stopped being the one who always bent over backward to please everyone? What if I just stopped? The idea took root in my mind, like a seed planted in fertile soil, growing with each passing moment. I knew I could never change what had already happened, but I could control how I responded. I could stop being the doormat, the one who just took the pain without ever pushing back. But how could I do that? How could I take back control of my life when it felt like my family had already turned their backs on me? That night, I decided I would stop being the victim. I wasn't going to let this happen to me anymore. I wasn't going to beg for their attention or affection. I was going to make them see me, not just as the person who gave them everything, but as someone who deserved respect. But I had to be strategic. It wasn't going to be enough to just confront Ben directly. That wouldn't work. No, I had to play this carefully. I had to be patient. And so, I began my plan. The weeks dragged on, and with every passing day, the distance between me and my daughter grew. It wasn't just Ben's cruelty that was driving a wedge between us. It was Amanda's silence. Her refusal to acknowledge the pain he was causing me was just as painful as the insults Ben had hurled my way. Every time I walked into their home, I felt the coldness in the air. It wasn't just the absence of warmth in their greeting. It was something deeper, something that gnawed at my soul. I started noticing the little things, the way Ben would glance at me with that look of condescension, like I was an unwanted guest, the way Amanda would act as if everything was perfectly fine, even when I could see the cracks in their marriage starting to show. She would smile at me, but it wasn't real. It was a mask, a facade that I knew all too well. It hurt more than I can put into words to realize that my own daughter didn't see me. She didn't notice the way Ben treated me, the way he dismissed me like I was nothing. Maybe it was easier for her to pretend. Maybe it was simpler to ignore the truth, to just go along with the charade. But I couldn't ignore it anymore. It was like living in a house of glass. One wrong move, and everything would shatter. I remember one afternoon, I went over to visit them, eager to spend time with my grandchildren. It was supposed to be a simple, happy visit, but when I walked through the door, I was met with a sense of isolation that hit me like a wall. Ben was on the couch, flipping through a magazine, not even bothering to look up. Amanda was in the kitchen, her back to me as she prepared dinner. No hello, no, how are you, Mom? Nothing. I stood there in the doorway, unsure of what to do. But I was about to say something, but then I remembered Ben's words from that fateful day. You smell like a hospital. The memory of it clung to me, and I felt a wave of humiliation wash over me once again. I took a deep breath, forced a smile, and walked into the kitchen. Amanda barely acknowledged me. her eyes flicking to me for a moment before she turned back to what she was doing. It was like I wasn't even there. "Need any help?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Amanda didn't even pause. "No, Mom. I'm fine." I swallowed the lump in my throat, forcing myself not to break down right then and there. This wasn't supposed to be how it was supposed to be. I had envisioned this time with my daughter and grandchildren to be filled with love and warmth, but all I felt was an overwhelming sense of rejection. Ben, who had been sitting on the couch, got up and walked into the kitchen. He didn't even glance at me, just brushed past me like I wasn't worth acknowledging. I could feel my heart sinking with every step he took away from me. It was in moments like this that the truth became undeniable. I was no longer a part of their world. Later, when I was leaving, Ben made a point of opening the door for me with a smile that felt more like a sneer. "Take care, Helen," he said, his voice dripping with insincerity. It was as if he were doing me a favor by letting me leave. Amanda stood in the background, arms crossed, not saying a word. She didn't have to. The silence between us spoke louder than anything she could have said. I didn't cry when I got in the car. I was too tired for that, but the weight of it all settled over me like a blanket, suffocating me with its intensity. I felt small. I felt invisible. I felt like I didn't matter anymore. It wasn't the first time I'd been treated this way, but this time, something inside me snapped. I had given everything to them. My love, my time, my money, and this was how they treated me? The truth was, I couldn't take it anymore. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. I wasn't going to beg for their love. I wasn't going to wait around to be seen. No, I had to do something. I had to make them see me. I wasn't going to sit in silence and let this continue. But what could I do? The answer came to me slowly, over the course of the next few days. It wasn't about being loud or aggressive. No, it was about being smart. It was about hitting them where it hurt the most. They had no idea how much power I still had. But I knew, and I was going to make sure they knew too. I would make them see me, and when they did, they would regret ever treating me the way they had. The decision to change wasn't easy. For so many years I had played the role of the dutiful mother, always sacrificing, always giving. But now, standing on the precipice of my own despair, I realized I had been the one allowing myself to be pushed aside. My daughter, my own flesh and blood, had accepted Ben's cruelty without a second thought. I'd done everything for them, and yet they couldn't see me. They couldn't even offer me a simple word of gratitude or kindness. It was as though I was invisible in their lives, a ghost they barely noticed. I wasn't going to stand by and let that continue. It had been months since Ben's cruel words, but the sting of them hadn't faded. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard his voice. "You smell like a hospital." Those words rang through my mind like a bell, reminding me that I wasn't enough for them, not enough to be respected, not enough to be valued. But here's the thing. I wasn't going to keep allowing myself to be treated this way. Something inside me shifted. It wasn't just the anger I felt. It was the realization that I still had power. I'd been so focused on making them happy, on playing the role of the selfless mother and grandmother, that I had forgotten about myself. I had forgotten about my own needs, my own desires, my own worth. No more. I sat down at my kitchen table late one night, the weight of the decision settling into my bones. I could have confronted them directly. I could have yelled and screamed, told them how badly they had hurt me, but I knew better. I knew that wouldn't work. Ben wasn't the type to listen to reason, and Amanda had her own struggles. Confrontation would only push them further away. But if I hit them where it hurt, if I made them feel the consequences of their actions, they would finally notice me. They would have no choice but to see the woman they had been taking for granted all this time. I started to think about all the sacrifices I'd made for them over the years, the mortgage I had paid off for their house, the times I had picked up the pieces for Amanda when she needed me, the countless hours I had spent making sure their lives ran smoothly. And what did I get in return? Nothing but coldness and disdain. I couldn't undo the past, but I could change how I was going to respond from here on out. I had to take control of my life again. I had to stop being the victim, stop waiting for them to change, and start making the changes myself. The first thing I decided to do was stop paying the mortgage. I had been covering the entire amount for months, thinking it was a way to help them, a way to show my love. But I had been wrong. I wasn't helping them. I was enabling them. enabling their disrespect. It wasn't a decision I made lightly. I had always been a woman who believed in family, in helping those you loved, no matter the cost. But what good was my help if it was only being used as a tool to control me, to keep me in the background? They didn't appreciate me. They didn't even see me. And that needed to change. So I stopped paying the mortgage, just like that. The following weeks were tense, but I kept my resolve. I refused to call or check in. I didn't want to know what was happening in their lives anymore. If they wanted me, they would have to come to me. They would have to see me, really see me, for the first time in years. At first, nothing happened. The phone didn't ring, the doorbell didn't ring, and I didn't hear from Amanda or Ben. But then, slowly, things began to change. I could feel it in the air. I knew that they were starting to feel the pressure. The silence between us was deafening, and I wasn't sure how much longer they could ignore the growing rift. But I wasn't going to give in. I wasn't going to be the one to break the silence. I had done enough for them, given enough of myself. It was their turn now. They had to come to me. I knew that this was just the beginning. I had taken the first step in regaining control of my life. But there was still more to be done. There was still more they needed to learn, and I wasn't going to stop until they learned it. I wasn't just Helen anymore. I wasn't just the mother who gave and gave. I was someone who would no longer tolerate being overlooked, disrespected, or taken for granted. I would make them see me, and when they finally did, it would be too late for them to turn back. It's amazing how silence can be the most powerful tool in a situation. At first, I was unsure of myself, unsure of how to carry out this new path I had chosen. But the more I stepped back from them, the more I realized that the silence wasn't just a withdrawal, it was a message louder than any argument or confrontation could ever be. I watched them, Amanda and Ben, drift further into their own lives as the days passed. They probably thought I had forgotten about them, that I had given up. But I hadn't. No, I was watching closely, calculating every move, every shift in the air. They didn't know it, but I was already 3 steps ahead. I made sure to keep my distance, but I wasn't angry anymore. The anger had turned into something more focused, something more controlled. They didn't deserve my anger. They deserved something else, a lesson. They had taken me for granted for far too long, and now it was time for them to feel the consequences. The first signs that they were starting to notice came in the form of missed calls. I wasn't the one reaching out anymore. I had stopped doing that long ago. Now, when the phone rang, I looked at the number and let it go to voicemail. Amanda, I knew, was calling, probably to ask why I hadn't paid the mortgage, to ask what was going on. But I didn't want to talk to her. Not yet. Not until she came to me, truly came to me, and understood what she had been doing all this time. Ben, of course, didn't bother calling. He never did, unless he needed something, unless he was trying to manipulate his way into getting what he wanted. I knew that very well. He was always so calculating, so selfish. The moment he realized the mortgage wasn't being paid, I knew he would try to put pressure on me. But I wasn't going to give in. Not this time. I had a lot of time to think during these days of silence. I reflected on everything. The way Ben had disrespected me, the way Amanda had stood by and said nothing. And I began to realize something important. I had been letting them control the narrative for far too long. I had always been the one trying to make peace, always trying to patch things up, always putting their needs above my own. But it was never enough. I had never been enough for them, and that was the bitter truth. And then I thought about the choices I had left. I could continue to let them walk all over me, continue to be the person they could rely on only when they needed something. Or I could stand firm and force them to see me, to recognize my worth. I decided I would stand firm. The silence was working. Every day that went by without a word from me, I felt a small victory. I could see it in the way Amanda would hesitate when she walked past my house, as if unsure whether to knock on the door. I could hear it in the way the silence between us grew heavier. The longer they ignored me, the more they would start to feel it. The more they would realize just how much I had been giving and how little they had been appreciating. It wasn't long before I got my first text from Amanda. It was short, almost cold. "Mom, is everything okay? Why aren't you answering your phone?" I smiled to myself as I read it. She had finally noticed, but it wasn't enough. I wasn't going to give in just yet. Not until she truly understood what had been happening. I didn't reply to her text right away. Instead, I went about my day, feeling a sense of quiet satisfaction. For once, I wasn't at their mercy. I wasn't begging for their attention. I was controlling the narrative now. The next day, another message came through from Amanda. This time, there was a hint of urgency. "Mom, please talk to me. We need to figure this out. Ben is upset about the house payments." That was it. She was finally starting to see the cracks in the foundation of their perfect little world. The first real sign that they were beginning to feel the pressure. But Ben's distress didn't concern me. It never had. It was Amanda's reaction that mattered. She was the one who needed to come to terms with what had been happening all along. I let another day pass, letting the silence linger between us. When I finally did respond, it wasn't with an answer to her concerns. I didn't owe her that, not yet. Instead, I simply replied, "When you're ready to listen, we can talk." And just like that, the ball was in her court. I could feel it in the air, the tension thickening between us, building with every passing moment. Amanda's texts had become more frequent, more desperate. She couldn't avoid the growing distance any longer. She was starting to feel the strain of her life unraveling, bit by bit. But Ben? He didn't seem to notice at first. I didn't expect him to. He was always too wrapped up in his own desires, his own ego, to pay attention to the cracks forming in his perfect world. But the day came when Ben finally reached out to me. It wasn't a phone call. No, he wasn't going to speak to me directly. Ben was too proud for that. Instead, he sent a message, and that message was everything I needed to hear. "Why aren't you paying the mortgage?" it read, blunt and to the point. "You know Amanda and I have a lot of expenses. We can't afford to keep the house without your help." The audacity of it. The nerve. I wasn't sure if I should laugh or cry. I had given them everything I could for years, helping with bills, picking up their slack, paying for things they couldn't afford. But now, in this moment, he was treating me like an ATM, like I existed only to serve their needs. And now that the money wasn't flowing as freely as it once had, he was demanding answers. I had to pause for a moment. I wasn't going to respond rashly. Not now. I had already started this process of silence, of distancing myself from them, and I wasn't about to break it. I knew he was getting desperate. The more he needed something from me, the more he'd push, the more he'd try to manipulate me. But I wasn't going to fall for it. I stared at my phone, wondering if I should say something, anything. But then I remembered what I had been telling myself. I wasn't the one who had been wrong here. I hadn't been the one to disrespect them. I wasn't the one who had turned a blind eye to the injustices they had inflicted on me. I had been the one who was always there, who always gave. And now? Now, it was their turn to come to me. So I replied, but not the way he wanted me to. "Maybe you should talk to Amanda," I wrote, keeping it calm, measured. "This isn't about the mortgage. It's about respect, something I haven't received much of lately." I put the phone down and breathed a sigh of relief. The silence after sending that message was almost deafening. I was waiting for the storm to hit. I knew Ben wasn't going to let this go easily. He couldn't. He had been living off my generosity for far too long. Now that it wasn't coming, he had no idea how to deal with it. The next few hours passed in a tense quiet. I could almost feel the anxiety radiating off of him through the phone. But I didn't hear from him again that night. I went to bed with a sense of power. The first real sense of power I had felt in a long time. But the next day, the storm came. Amanda's call was more frantic than I had expected. "Mom, please, you can't just stop paying for the house. Ben is furious, and we're going to lose everything if you don't help us." Her voice trembled, and I could hear the panic in her tone. But I didn't give in. This wasn't about the house or the money anymore. It was about the deeper issue. Respect. They had taken me for granted for so long, and now that I wasn't enabling them anymore, they were reeling. I let the silence stretch for a few seconds before I spoke, my voice calm but firm. "I'm not going to be your safety net anymore, Amanda," I said. "You and Ben need to figure this out. You need to stop treating me like I'm just here to solve your problems." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear her breathing, trying to compose herself. Then softly, almost apologetically, she spoke. "I know you're upset," she said, "but Ben doesn't understand. He doesn't know how to handle all this pressure, and I don't know what to do anymore." I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the weight of her words settle in. I wasn't angry at her. I was angry at the situation, at how Ben had manipulated everything around him, at how Amanda had let him get away with it. But what could I do? I couldn't fix this for her. She had to fix it herself. You need to stand up to him, I told her. You need to stop allowing him to treat you like this. But no, Amanda, you need to be stronger than this. You need to take control of your life. I can't do that for you anymore. The line went silent, and for a moment, I wasn't sure if she was even going to respond. But then she did, her voice small and fragile. I'll try, she whispered. I hung up the phone feeling something I hadn't in a long time. Relief. It wasn't going to be easy. I knew that. But Amanda had to make her own decisions now. She couldn't keep using me as a crutch to avoid the truth. The stage was set now. Ben's desperation was only going to grow. And when he pushed hard enough, I would be ready. But for now, I had to let him feel the weight of his own actions. I had already given them everything I could. Now, they had to see the cost of their neglect. The days that followed felt like a pressure cooker slowly reaching its boiling point. Ben was no fool. The moment he realized I wasn't going to bail him out, the full extent of his temper began to show. The messages and calls from Amanda continued to pour in, but it wasn't the frantic, pleading messages that got to me. It was Ben's silent retaliation that made my stomach churn. At first, the silence between us was a sort of weapon. It was calculated, but the more I watched Amanda struggle with it, the more I realized that the silence was no longer enough. Something else was happening beneath the surface, something that I hadn't fully understood before. Ben was beginning to show his true colors, and it wasn't pretty. It started with little things, but I began to notice them all. Amanda would mention offhandedly that Ben seemed more on edge lately, more irritable, more distant. She didn't seem to connect it to the fact that he was losing control over his life. He couldn't fix the house without my money. And Amanda, for all her attempts to pretend it wasn't happening, was starting to feel the cracks too. Ben would bark at her over small things, nothing major, just sharp words here and there, the same words he used on me, only now they were directed at her. I remember one evening, I decided to check in on my grandchildren, hoping that maybe, just maybe, I could still be part of their lives in some way, even if it was through the smallest of gestures. When I arrived at their house, I could feel the tension in the air even before I walked through the door. Amanda was in the kitchen, her back to me, trying to get dinner ready. The kids were playing in the living room, but the moment I stepped inside, the house seemed eerily quiet. Ben was sitting on the couch, his eyes glued to his phone. He didn't even look up when I walked in. Not a greeting, not a hello, not even a glance. I could feel his resentment like a heavy cloud, suffocating everything around me. I wanted to leave. I really did. But something inside me held me there. I wasn't going to let him chase me away. Not anymore. I had every right to be there, and I wasn't going to let him make me feel like I was the one in the wrong. Amanda, do you need help with dinner? I asked, trying to break the silence. But she didn't answer. She didn't even turn around. I could hear the faint sound of Ben's voice from the living room, snapping at the kids to be quieter, his tone sharp, like broken glass. I swallowed the lump in my throat. The tension in the house was palpable. This wasn't the home I had once imagined for my daughter, the one filled with warmth and love. This place felt suffocating, full of anger and fear. Amanda, honey? I called again, a little louder this time. She finally turned, her face drawn and tired, her eyes avoiding mine. She was a shell of the woman I once knew, the woman who had smiled with joy and love when I'd visit, who had shared everything with me. Now there was nothing but exhaustion in her face, a weariness that made me want to take her in my arms and protect her from whatever she was going through. But I couldn't do that. Not anymore. Mom, she sighed, wiping her hands on her apron. I don't know what to do. Ben, he's just so angry all the time. He's not the man I married anymore. I could see the tears welling up in her eyes, but she held them back. I wanted to rush over to her, tell her everything was going to be okay, that I would fix it, that I could fix him. But I couldn't. She had to find the strength to fix it herself. You have to stand up for yourself, Amanda, I said, my voice low but firm. You can't let him treat you like this. You deserve better. She shook her head. I can't. I don't know how. He's changed, and I don't know how to handle it anymore. I looked over at Ben, still glued to his phone. He didn't even care that I was standing there. He didn't care that his wife was breaking down. He was too focused on his own problems to see what was happening right in front of him. It was clear that Ben didn't just disregard me. He disregarded everyone. He was so consumed by his own need for control and power that he couldn't see the devastation he was leaving in his wake. "I know you're scared, Amanda," I said quietly, my heart breaking for her. "But you don't have to be scared anymore. You don't have to let him keep controlling you. You are stronger than you think." The words hung in the air, heavy with truth. Amanda finally looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time in a long time. And for the first time in a long time, I saw a flicker of something in her eyes, something more than just exhaustion. It was hope. She didn't say anything, but she didn't need to. The look she gave me told me everything I needed to know. Amanda was starting to wake up. She was starting to realize that this wasn't the life she deserved, and maybe, just maybe, she could find the strength to change it. But before she could respond, Ben's voice boomed from the living room, interrupting the moment. "Are you done in there yet, Amanda? The kids are waiting to eat." I saw Amanda flinch at his tone, and my heart twisted. I wanted to do something, to stand up to him, to tell him off right there and then. But I didn't. Not yet. This was Amanda's battle, not mine. "I'm coming," she muttered, her voice barely above a whisper. As she walked past me, I put a hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to be afraid of him, Amanda. You have the power to change this. You just have to believe that." And with that, she nodded, though I could see the conflict in her eyes. I didn't know if she would find the strength to do what needed to be done, but I had to believe she would. As I left their house that night, I could feel the shift in the air. Ben's influence was beginning to slip, and though it would take time, I knew that Amanda was beginning to see him for what he truly was. But the question now was, would she find the courage to stand up to him before it was too late? I had done what I could. I had offered the words of wisdom, the encouragement, the support, but deep down, I knew this was Amanda's fight now. It was her life, her marriage, her decision whether to stand up to Ben. But as each day passed, the weight of the situation pressed harder against my chest. The more I saw the cracks forming in their relationship, the more I realized that if Amanda didn't make a choice soon, the consequences would be too great. I couldn't just stand by anymore and hope for the best. I couldn't let Ben keep abusing my daughter, emotionally and mentally. I had seen the way he treated her, the way he manipulated her, the way he tore her down a little more each day. His cruel words had only gotten worse, and I wasn't blind to the marks he left on her. Not physical ones, but the emotional scars that were starting to pile up. Amanda wasn't just sad anymore. She was lost, and it crushed me to see it. I had raised her to be strong, to stand up for herself, to fight for what was right. Yet here she was, trapped in a marriage with a man who used his power to break her down. Ben had broken her in ways that weren't visible to the eye, but I could see it. I could feel it in the way she walked around with her head down, the way she hesitated before speaking, the way she second-guessed every decision. She was suffocating under the weight of a man who had no respect for her, and worse, I had let it happen. I had stood by for too long, waiting for her to find the courage to break free on her own. But now, after everything, I realized it wasn't enough, not anymore. And that's when I made the decision I had been circling around for weeks. I couldn't save Amanda from herself, but I could save her from Ben. I would not sit idly by while he continued to manipulate her. It was time to take a stand. It was time to do what needed to be done, even if it was drastic, even if it meant crossing a line I hadn't considered before. I picked up my phone and made the call. James. A name I hadn't uttered in years, but someone who, if I was honest with myself, had always been there, lurking in the background, waiting for me to make a move. James wasn't the kind of man you called unless you were desperate. He was a former private investigator, now working outside the law, solving problems for people who didn't want to get their hands dirty. He had a reputation for getting results, but not through kindness or diplomacy. He was, as the saying goes, a fixer. I hadn't wanted to go to him. I had thought I could handle this on my own, that the situation would resolve itself if I gave it time. But I had misjudged just how deeply Ben's control ran. I could see now that my daughter wasn't going to get out of this mess on her own. I needed someone who could send a message without the need for words. When James picked up, I didn't waste any time. "James," I said, my voice steady, calm, but determined. "I need a favor, something drastic." He listened, as he always did, without interrupting. By the end of our conversation, he understood what I needed from him. He didn't ask questions. He didn't offer advice. He simply agreed, and that was all I needed. I hung up the phone, my heart pounding in my chest. There was no turning back now. I had made my choice. The next few days were filled with an eerie sense of calm. I didn't hear from Amanda or Ben. They were in crisis mode. I knew. Ben was angry, more angry than usual, and Amanda was trying to hold everything together. I watched from a distance as their world crumbled, as Ben's control over Amanda started to slip. But I also saw something else, a flicker of light in Amanda's eyes, a sign that she was beginning to see through the facade. She wasn't fully ready to break free yet, but she was beginning to question things. I could tell. And then, one evening, James made his move. I wasn't there when it happened. I didn't need to be, but I knew he had done what was necessary. I had trusted him to send a message loud and clear, without causing irreparable harm. And he did. It was subtle, but effective. Ben would understand the message immediately. The next day, I received a call from Amanda. Her voice was shaky, but there was a new sense of clarity in it. "Mom, I don't know what happened, but I'm scared. Ben, he's different. Something's not right." I took a deep breath, steadying myself before I responded. "Amanda," I said softly, "it's time. You need to stand up for yourself. You need to take control of your life." She was silent for a long moment, and I could feel the weight of her decision hanging between us. But then, finally, she spoke. "I don't know if I can. Mom, I don't know if I'm strong enough." "You are," I said, my voice firm, reassuring. "You are stronger than you know." I didn't need to say anything more. She knew what she had to do. It was only a matter of time before she made her choice, before she found the courage to walk away from Ben for good. The silence, the pressure, the emotional toll, everything was building toward this moment. And now, I could only wait and watch as Amanda found the strength she needed to break free. I had done what I could. I had set things in motion. And now, the rest was up to her. The tension that had been building for weeks finally came to a head. I had watched, patiently waiting, knowing that Amanda would have to make her decision soon. I had set things in motion, but ultimately, it was up to her. I couldn't make the choice for her. I couldn't fix her marriage for her. But I had given her the tools. I had given her the push she needed. And now, I just had to wait for her to act. The phone call came on a Friday afternoon. It was Amanda, her voice shakier than usual. "Mom, I don't know what to do," she whispered, as though afraid someone might hear her. He's out of control. I don't even know who he is anymore." I felt a lump form in my throat. My heart broke for her, but this was the moment I had been waiting for. The tipping point had arrived. "Amanda, listen to me," I said, trying to keep my voice calm, steady. "You don't have to keep living like this. You have the strength to leave, to take back control of your life. You don't have to be afraid anymore. I'm here. I'll help you." There was silence on the other end. For a moment, I thought maybe she hadn't heard me. Maybe she was still too scared to take the leap. But then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she spoke. "I can't do it, Mom. I can't leave him. What if he's right? What if I can't make it on my own?" I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath. I had to be strong for her. She needed to hear me, truly hear me, in this moment. "Amanda," I said, my voice soft but resolute. "He's not right. He's been controlling you, manipulating you, breaking you down. And you've let him. But you don't have to anymore. You are stronger than this. I'm not going to let you stay in a relationship where you're constantly being hurt." I heard her breathe shakily, like she was about to break down, and for a moment, I thought she might. But then, something shifted in her tone. It was subtle, but it was there. "I'm scared, Mom. I don't know if I can do this without losing everything. He'll fight me. He always does." I could feel the weight of her fear, but I also knew that this fear wasn't stronger than the need for her to be free. "You have more than just fear on your side," I said, the words coming from a place deep inside me. "You have the truth. You have your own strength. And most of all, you have me. You're not alone, Amanda. You don't have to keep letting him control you. I'll be right here, every step of the way." There was another long silence, but this time, when Amanda spoke again, I heard something different in her voice. It was a crack in the wall she had built up around herself, a hint of resolve. "I'm going to do it," she said, her voice trembling but stronger than before. "I'm going to talk to him. I'm going to take control back." I felt a rush of relief wash over me. It wasn't a victory yet, not completely, but it was a start. Amanda had taken the first step. She was ready to face the truth, ready to break free from the prison she had been living in for so long. "I'm proud of you, Amanda," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "You're stronger than you think." She didn't say anything after that. She didn't need to. I knew that the next steps were going to be hard for her. Ben wouldn't go down without a fight. But I had faith in her. I knew that she could do this. That night, I waited for the inevitable phone call from Amanda. I knew it wouldn't come right away. There was still so much to work through. But as I sat in my living room, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. It wasn't over yet, but at least Amanda was no longer stuck in the darkness. The phone rang later that evening, and I jumped. It was Amanda. "Mom," she said, her voice quieter now, but with a firmness that hadn't been there before. I told him